In a sunny little garden, there was a tiny rose bush. It was the smallest rose bush in the entire garden, but it had a big heart. Every morning, the tiny rose bush would open its petals to the warm sunshine, and every evening, it would close them gently to rest. One day, a little bunny named Benny hopped by the garden. He saw the tiny rose bush and thought, "That's the perfect spot for me to play." Benny started to dig and play around the tiny rose bush. He didn't mean any harm, but he didn't know that he was disturbing the tiny rose bush. The tiny rose bush felt its roots being pulled and twisted. It was scared, but it didn't give up. It kept on blooming, hoping for a chance to grow big and beautiful. One day, Benny noticed that the tiny rose bush was not blooming as brightly as before. He realized that he might have hurt the tiny rose bush. Feeling sorry, Benny apologized to the tiny rose bush. He promised to be gentle and respectful from now on. The tiny rose bush forgave Benny and started to bloom again. Benny was happy to see that and decided to help the tiny rose bush grow more beautiful. From that day on, Benny would water the tiny rose bush every day and keep the area around it clean. The tiny rose bush grew bigger and bigger, and soon it was no longer the smallest rose bush in the garden. Benny and the tiny rose bush became the best of friends. They would spend their days together, with Benny playing around the garden and the tiny rose bush blooming beautifully. And so, they lived happily ever after, teaching everyone that even the smallest things can make a big difference. The end.